I'd like to give a special thanks to Global for their generous support of this program.
It seems kind of preposterous that I should be told, sit here. Read the book. I'm telling you, this thing is a bestseller. All the business people are talking about it. It doesn't talk about the office. So there's a real disconnect. Who? What was there? What was in that conference? That's a problem that you're not seeing the connection to the built environment. Capabilities are changing all the time, so we can't be static. We can't sit still. But the real estate industry likes sit still. You say, oh gosh, I wish we could have done it this way. And you don't have to go down the path of like, I'm trying to solve for every individual person. Few teams have really thought about what is the purpose of this plan. You know, they'll tell you with brutal transparency, this is how we operate. Then we're designing for a reason. Fail fast, test and learn is being invoked constantly. It's incredibly powerful. So you don't even have to ask. And those companies were off the charts performers. Fully remote companies that have to be, by definition, really rigorous in the choices that they make for how people work together. And because they're so good at it, they do something that most normal companies can't, which is write it down and put it on the internet.
At conferences where chief financial officers, human resource, and information technology leaders are shaping strategy and making big decisions, the physical workplace gets almost no airtime. And yet, it's expected to support all of it. And on the flip side, those same executives rarely show up at the conferences where real estate and the workplace are the focus. So who in the C-suite is actually thinking about the workplace? Different leaders defining work in different ways with different metrics. And these environments become something kind of generic, trying to satisfy everyone, but doesn't fully support how the organization actually works. Hi, I'm Bob Fox. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, the show where we explore how work and the workplace are evolving and what it all means for organizations trying to figure it out. If you have an interest in the workplace and how we can make it better, you won't want to miss an episode. So please like and subscribe. And be sure to share this with someone trying to create better workplaces. Also, check out our State of the Workplace report. It describes how the work environment is shifting across multiple disciplines. The link is in the description below. Today, I'm joined by Phil Kirschner, who is a workplace strategist, researcher, and creator of the Work Line. Phil works closely with HR, IT, and real estate leaders, helping them develop the clarity, vocabulary, and the tools to design the roles, rituals, and rooms that actually make work. He spent over 20 years at organizations like McKinsey, WeWork, JLL, Credit Suisse, and now PK Consulting, where he helps guide global organizations to deliver measurable outcomes. And today, we're going to dig into this idea of siloed leadership, the invisible workplace problem, and what it would take to actually align people, technology, and place. Phil, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Great to be back. my second round on What the F.
You know, you and I met a long time ago. I think it was actually at a work tech conference in New York.
Probably, yes.
And you were still at Credit Suisse, but I've always enjoyed your perspective on the workplace. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Me too.
But for our audience, give us a little insight into your background and how you look at the workplace.
Sure. So my background is actually in technology. I usually lead with that. I studied computer science. I did technology risk and architecture work first, and then cost management long before falling into workplace. So I do not have a design background, not an architecture background, nor leasing, nor facilities, nor any of that. And I fell into workplace directly into kind of activity-based work and shared environments and sort of internal co-working. I never really knew the old way or the traditional way. So I think that deeply informs the way I think about it, because I've only ever come at it from maybe the most complicated, experience-forward, data-driven approach to measuring outcomes and effectiveness in the office. Much more of a spreadsheets than in design kind of a person. And now having had a background starting as a practitioner for workplace, then as a pretty traditional consultant at a major real estate service provider in JLL, anything but traditional consultant while at WeWork, and really strengthening my backbone on the role of activation and community on outcomes, not just kind of design and ways of working. And then McKinsey, most recently, really leveling up my perspective on the business side problem of outcomes in workplace, not only for occupiers, but for the developers, owners, operators who are also trying to respond to post-COVID realities with our relationship with work. And now, what that means for the kind of AI revolution on top of everything we were already changing in the last couple of years.
No, well, that's great. I think you're one of the few people that I follow that crosses over multiple disciplines in the way that we look at the workplace. And you've been digging into this idea that there's a growing disconnect between how organizations think about work and how they think about the workplace. So I'm wondering if you could share some insight into that a little bit.
Yeah, so it is not a new idea or understanding across the corporate real estate industry in particular, but I have become more acutely aware of the knock-on effect of the fact that corporate real estate or facility management or property or whatever the acronym is internally, the people who think about the office for a company that doesn't make offices could report to a wide range of executive functions, HR, finance, IT, legal, COO or operations, CAO. And even within that kind of spectrum, where in those organizations real estate sits can also vary. I was at a conference in the fall and did a quick straw poll of people in the audience, like, where do you roll up? And let's just say, broadly speaking, it was a third, like finance, HR, and everybody else. But even the folks who report to finance, some are direct to CFO, some are in accounting, some are in procurement, some are in treasury. They're all over depending on the nature of the company. And in the room, I don't think anyone thought that that's a problem. But what I started to realize after that conference, going to a couple of others that are not in the real estate industry, HR conferences, IT conferences, AI sort of industry conferences, and seeing that the built environment is never mentioned at all on any of those kind of landscapes. It became clear to me, it's like, oh, because no single executive persona thinks that they own real estate, it doesn't show up in their forums, right? Recruiting is always on the docket somewhere at an HR conference. Procurement always on the docket somewhere at a finance conference. But despite the fact that, let's say, a third of those leaders have real estate facilities in their mix somewhere, they don't identify it as one of their functions. And you also hear it from the other end. Somebody at that same conference where I did the straw poll was lamenting that they had recently lost a technology leader in their team who had left for another opportunity. They are in the HR function, direct report to the CHRO, went to the IT team that supports HR, looking after Workday and the payroll systems, and said, hey, basically, can you help me? Like, I'm down a technology resource. I have some initiatives that need to be carried forward. And they said, no, we only support HR. And that guy's like, I literally report to the CHRO. Doesn't that make me HR? But even that internal function didn't see it that way. So there's a real disconnect. And because there's no home, and I love these conferences too, but that means that we in real estate stay at Cornet, we stay at IFMA, we stay at ULI or IREM and talk to each other and not to the executives that are thinking about bigger, bolder, business-oriented futures.
Well, I expect them to get some pushback from corporate real estate and FM professionals. And so I kind of wanted to address this right up front, where you've talked about corporate real estate and facilities management being organizationally homeless, which is, I think, what you're getting at right here, where, there's no sort of path to the leadership table for those guys to express their perspectives. So I'm wondering if you can explain that a little bit or share some of your thoughts.
There are many, many incredibly strategic and capable and change driving real estate leaders who have a legitimate seat at the table in their respective companies. Although that event, like with the straw poll, I was leading a panel with 3 of them. And even they expressed all the challenges of getting changes through and being seen as a cost center and the kind of financial barriers to making change. But even if you assume that within their company, they are at the table, the problem is the topic is not at the table at an industry level. And the people who are prognosticating about the future of work do not mention the knock-on effect that the future of work will have on our consumption of the workplace. So a simple example, I can, from where I'm sitting, look at a number of books that talk about the evolution of the organization and power to the teams and work being much less predictable, more dynamic day over day. Maybe I'm not working with and around the same people day over day or week over week as priorities change or as some AI agent tells me I should be doing something else. Let's just assume that there's a degree of truth in that. If there's a degree of truth, it seems kind of preposterous that I should be told, sit here and don't move. Why? Because desk sharing is hard, which it is. And this is like how I fell into the industry, but fine. So it's hard. And if we frame it as a cost measure, employees will continue to resist it. But the very employees and leaders who are resisting it or trying to use assigned seats as a carrot to get people back to the office at the level that they want them in this new post-pandemic world are the same ones writing the books or reading the books saying that skills-based resourcing and team allocation is coming and much less predictable work is coming because we're evolving our skills and AI is going to do a lot of work for us. All that change, but yet we should sit here. Like, that's a problem that you're not seeing the connection to the built environment and what will need to change in the built environment and how the people who run that built environment for you need to be engaged in that problem and pushing you and the company to a different plane of value for the role that the built environment has in your business objectives.
But I mean, I'm just wondering, do you think that's a widely understood issue, or do you think most people are still oblivious to it?
The latter, which is why I try to write about it as much as I can. And I try to make it not about me, right? Like, that's why with the conference research, right, I went far and wide and like multiple rounds of AI-powered deep research checks with individual people. Anytime anyone told me, oh, I went to this event, what was there? What was in that conference? What was at that topic? Sharing the books that I'm looking at that I've written about. Be like, go read the book. I'm telling you, this thing is a bestseller. All the business people are talking about it. It doesn't talk about the office. And I don't want to feel like a broken record, but it's true. And I love that there has slowly started to be more recognition in different industries. I was interviewed recently for a major HR podcast on this topic, published an op-ed for one of the 2 largest HR conferences on this topic, like why real estate is missing. And so there's a recognition it's happening, but we need the real estate industry, like corporate real estate industry, to align on that being a problem so that we can align on what we will do about it.
There's so many thoughts going through my head right now, but I'm wondering, in the research that you've done and all the testing, what's surprised you the most in the data that you saw?
Well, the conference part. The other one, a couple months ago, I ran like a listening lab, called it, with 50 real estate workplace leaders from different companies, different shapes and sizes, using an AI-powered social listening tool called Natter to hoover up the results of, or not the results, the kind of aggregate of, it was 138 one-on-one conversations over the course of an hour by pairing people randomly. And we talked about all sorts of things. But one of the topics was about like iteration and change. And it came up in a survey that I had people take before they joined. So actually the last time you and I spoke in this forum, I was still at McKinsey when I had run workplace effectiveness and experience capability assessment. We published that at the time, 12 factors that were co-developed with a number of real estate leaders and then sent out to 50 real estate leaders by name to find out like how their capabilities were evolving post-COVID for delivery of a best-in-class workplace experience. And one of the lowest performing capabilities then into 2022 or 3 was the ability to test and measure and iterate and learn and fail fast and be responsive. And then I asked the same question again last year, and it got worse, much worse, even compared to other ones that were still weak. And again, this is something where if you read any future of reports from IT or HR, fail fast, test and learn is being invoked constantly. That is how we are going to iterate with AI. Like the capabilities are changing all the time. So we can't be static. We can't sit still. But the real estate industry likes sit still and build things for 20 years and not go back and propose change, and easier to wait, for the approval to change the environment than to suggest something heretical like moving the humans day over day or week over week. And that really struck me as like, again, a sign that we are not embracing the same language that the executives that are seemingly responsible for identifying and moving companies towards the future of work. And it's really kind of baked in. Even in a CoreNet event last year, I wrote an opening remark saying, we are not going to be a cost center anymore. I counted a half a dozen different presentations over the course of the day where people were self-identifying as cost centers.
Interesting. I always use the analogy of the iPhone because it's a standard device. Everybody's got one, but we can all set it up with the specific apps that we use. We can arrange those apps the way that we want to use them. And it's an infinite amount of flexibility. And I always sort of wondered why the workplace couldn't be more like the iPhone in some ways.
What's really interesting is that I have a slide that I can picture in my head that we used to kick around at WeWork about how a building is like an iPhone with the hardware and the software, and it should be configurable to you with the key that in real estate, it's very expensive to quote, add an app. So we have to think more in terms of like moving around between the apps that provide different features and functions.
Sure.
And needing our real estate groups to help build that culture. It is intolerable to think that we will stick with static assignment in our buildings. And I think we can save a lot of money and achieve better outcomes by embracing the opportunity that comes from flexibility and mobility, connecting them to things that matter to our teams and to our companies, and helping them see if the more you move and the more exhaust that we can gather from your performance and your experience, the faster we can help you iterate and find a better version instead of waiting for the next lease in 10 years.
So I'm wondering, do you think ownership of the workplace has a big impact on that? And who actually owns the workplace today, or who should own it?
Within an occupier, or
I think within
kind of the industry level?
Yeah, I think if we look at organizations and their workplace and making sure that that workplace is designed so that organization can thrive, it supports that organization. Who's responsible for that?
So maybe I'll answer that in two parts. One, I'm a staunch believer that real estate and workplace must be more productized, which means that the people who build the supply can and should be operating more like a product with user-driven outcomes and better experience and change. That the building of the future is a little bit a full stack, WeWork or co-working, and I use that only because those providers operate like a product today. This is what you're supposed to get out of these spaces. This is how we're responsive to you. This is the smiling face at the front, and these are the technologies and the experiences. You can make a retail oriented choice. You want to work at this co-working place or that co-working place. We have different pros and cons and different vibes and different community, right? You pick the one that you want. We need more developers, owners, and operators to think that way instead of building the white box that a non-real estate company then has to move into with great effort and expense and time for a product that will not be perfect by the time they move in a year or two later, right? And then they're constantly iterating and facing the pain that we all know, that users say, "Oh gosh, I wish we could have done it this way," blah blah blah, and there's the failure of the iteration capability. Separately, um, I don't I don't think it's clear as to who quote unquote owns the workplace, but I do believe and wrote recently that organizations need a clearer, central, independent function that can help teams understand the impact of the choices that they are making in how, when, and where they work. So that as people gather in certain ways, as they choose to work in spaces of different configurations, again, with an idea that for maybe all but the headquarters castle in the sky, most companies and most of their people should in the future be consuming space much more transactionally and flexibly, so that we don't own the workplace on the occupier side, that we consume workplace products that are built and meet our needs with a much greater degree of flexibility to be responsive. Like if this space no longer meets our needs, we can move. Same building, across the street, within a campus, so on and so forth. So then what you do need is sort of an organizational Fitbit or fitness tracker to tell you, my team is operating in this way. We are using Slack. We are in this co-working space. We have this composition of teammates, employees, contractors, gig. We're kind of, this is how we are working. Is that working for us? Because if you ask the HR organization about employee experience, their definition is narrow and biased to the things they control, like an engagement survey. If you ask real estate about experience, it will be biased and narrow to the things that they control. Furniture, design, the barista. And IT, same thing. Oh, it's the intranet. Oh, we use Slack. We like this. We like that. It's my apps. Everybody's definition is based on what they control. So we have to get the measurement of that experience and the choices that we make to drive business outcomes out of those groups, so that it will not be biased. Yeah. Using the people in the organization we have now, who I think are excellent at that work, but it continues to be problematic. You have the blinders because of where they're buried.
So I'm just wondering that centralized organization that you described, where would that fit within the organization?
So I think that can depend. I have been using the phrase chief of work recently, which I did not invent. I got that from a 2014 report that I happen to be in, published by CBRE. I've also used the phrase kind of chief of what it feels like to work here, or the human chief operating officer. I think it can be in a lot of places. The company where I used to work and others I have served have versions of internal consulting or process improvement kind of functions that exist in COO, CAO, office of the CEO, somewhere else. That is a great start. It does not truly have to be an executive function. It just has to be independent from those groups, because said the bias, and also when you have two workplace types in a massive organization of real estate and like contractors and facilities and everything, they get buried or ignored when there's no project or when the lights go out, right? Like same thing in HR when it's comp season. The one person who runs the engagement survey becomes momentarily irrelevant, right? But employees continue to have experiences. So we need that heartbeat kind of monitor outside of those functions. And I do see recognition of that trend in other places. Deloitte just put out a report about future of organizations and included a real break in the way we think about some of those large corporate functions like HR, and splitting apart the kind of run the company gorilla from the change how we do things machine. And I think it's sort of related to that.
Are you looking at the workplace more from a bottom up perspective to say, this is the work that's happening and this is what the space needs to be? Or do you think it's more of a leadership issue that leadership describes this is the environment, this is the experience, this is our strategic vision and mission, and this space is a tool that's going to help us accomplish that?
I think work is a product. What what a company needs and what it feels like to do that work is a product that has experiences. The physical workplace is the most kind of visceral interface for most of us. Um, if an office that I'm told I have to go to or expected to go to regularly is not great, I feel it literally. But the office does not make an employee's experience, right? That plenty, you can read loads of examples of people in startups working like in a garage, right? With the greatest experience in the world. Purpose and leadership and culture can do a lot. And the most powerful drivers of organizational health aren't physical. They are kind of cultural and operational choices that you make around like how you collaborate digitally and things like knowledge sharing, right? Like are really provably powerful for what it feels like to work there. And you can see that with fully remote companies that have to be, by definition, really rigorous in the choices that they make for how people work together. And because they're so good at it, they do something that most normal companies can't, which is write it down and put it on the internet. They'll tell you with brutal transparency, this is how we operate. It is not a secret. We want you to know that before you hit that button to apply for a job. Because if you hate Slack for whatever reason, and our website says we literally run this entire company on Slack, don't apply. This is not the culture for you. And the physical workplace should be a signal too, but I think the digital ways of working are more powerful. So back to the question, I do think that it's a combination. One, teams should be nudged and suggested to work in places that make the most sense for them, whether or not they belong to the company. Too many leaders will say, I think work is better in person, and then, which may be true for whatever that job is, or that at least you should have some time together. But then they'll finish that sentence by saying, and I think that work must happen here, where the here is not so great for that work. They don't see the possibility, again, of the movement or the seeking of something that is better for that condition of work. So for the places that a company chooses to own, lease, operate on its own, they should lean into a narrower band of clearly defined purpose statements. Like this place exists for, client meetings or candidate onboarding or something, where you can be much clearer about like, if you're doing that thing, you can and should come here. This place should be designed, built, and operating in a way that is dialed very tightly to achieve those outcomes, which we measure. So both, like we need better and clearly defined places to work that are built for a narrower band of purposes. Because when you try to solve for everything for everybody, you get a BB minus at best. Narrower band. And also, we need to continue to iterate and evolve on how we are working with each other, completely independent of where we are working with each other.
You talked about the measurement of it. So I'm thinking, what are the metrics that you would be looking at to say this is performing well or it's not performing well?
Well, if you say, I'll tell another story back to that same straw poll conference. I asked how many people in the room had ever, when a project went live, said, look at our great new office. It is supposed to help attract and retain talent. I said, how many of you have ever invoked talent attraction or retention for a project? And like basically every hand went up. And I said, great. How many of you, this again, a room full of real estate professionals, how many of you from where you're sitting right now on your phone can tell me what the rolling average attrition rate is for that office that you're thinking of in your head? and not a single hand went up. When you probe about that, so like, why can't you? And again, the answer is like, well, HR has that information and they won't give it to me. Like, so you're in charge, in theory, of a product that is supposed to influence a metric that you don't have access to. That's
Interesting.
problematic. So retention is one. But I say, look, if you're building something that's meant to be, let's say, an easy example is like executive briefing centers, which is very common in the technology space. Like, this is where you come, where we wow you, right? It's a 360-degree immersive experience, start to finish, of what it's like to buy our product, to work with us, do something. Fancy screens, right? Like beautiful coffee. There's a real like typology for this. And the outcomes for those are somewhat obvious. What is the like sales close rate for people who come, or the number of clients who come, the velocity? If you're saying, oh, our clients come to visit once a month now, we build an executive briefing center, and now there's like here 2 or 3 times a week. That's a victory, right? But it's not just an office. It has sort of the same outcome as it's more like a retail store. How much stuff did we sell? If we didn't sell enough stuff, or we don't month over month, we close the office. And I just find few teams have really thought about what is the purpose of this place. And if you were to hold a performance review with your building and anthropomorphically put your building across the table from you and say, it's performance review time. What have you done for me lately? A, would the building even know what it is supposed to do? And B, could it measure its own performance? And the answer is no. Then you have not identified what the purpose of that place is. And just saying it is to house all of the people who live within 100 miles is not a good enough answer to earn the commute. Now,
Talk to me a little bit about how you look at the culture within an organization, because I feel like you go into the physical environment and you're immediately confronted with either images or slogans or artifacts, that represent, or even the history of awards and things like that in most organizations. So I'm wondering how you would look at that to build that culture within the organization.
surrounding employees by marketing, to me, is not culture. It is kind of brand awareness and alignment, which is not the same thing in my mind. And it's marketing, which is, it may work and may be really important, especially for consumer good kind of companies where many of the employees are also customers, right? So there's a virtuous cycle there. Absolutely. Like that. It's not that that doesn't matter, but that isn't the culture of the firm. And culture is much more like what people do when nobody's watching. Employees feel it. It is behavioral.
But the space has the ability to communicate.
The space has the ability to communicate it, but rarely, if ever, is actually a communication of what really happens. And of course, you'll see it with entitlement, right? All the senior people, they get a box with their name on it. That says
Well,
something.
that behavior is what's visible. People learn by watching others within that organization.
Yeah, but I think the most impactful leadership, in particular behaviors on the individual workers, are not visible in the office. They are, can I trust you? Do you give me feedback? Is the clarity of my role rock solid? Is the alignment of what my role and our team does relative to the company's objectives rock solid? Do I feel like I'm paid fairly? Do I feel like, there's bias in performance reviews? Those are the things that, like, am I burned out? That stuff you don't see. You might see, people are collaborative. You might see, we chat around coffee. We go to the bar and we talk to each other. I don't think you see the stuff that tugs on people's heartstrings, their emotions, and their psychological safety so clearly. It's very difficult.
I might push back on that a
Yeah,
little bit.
do.
As I know there was a point in my firm where there was an individual struggling. It wasn't immediately apparent, but it was a coworker who observed it and raised the issue and said, "Hey, you should deal with this." That otherwise may not have been apparent. And I mean, maybe that's a little altruistic, but I think
No,
the
let me play that back, right? You're saying like, because we as a team are physically together, I, as a colleague, have observed that you look like you're having a rough time right now.
yeah,
And I am being a human and I do something about that, right? Like, that's great. But that's not evident to the employee that is trying to decide, is this somewhere I want to work, right? That is a benefit of having psychological safety in human culture, with teams, people that treat each other like humans. But it's not evident. It's not on display. So maybe I push on the, like, when leaders used to come visit us at WeWork HQ, usually hat in hand, like, have barely made it off of the elevator. The question I would get all the time was a version of, why does it feel like this? By stepping into a center of gravity that is like energetic, buzzy, moving. Like, this is a feeling. And we say, yeah, we've curated this feeling. That is intentional. So you feel something. And it makes you interested to want to understand, like, what's going on here. So then we show you. And you could see the work on display. You can see the movement. The humanity and psychological safety, hopefully, is a byproduct of that.
why do you think the built environment is so often missing from these sort of transformation conversations?
I think because it's taken for granted. It's just like something that always was. I think people are burned out from the hybrid and RTO of it all. That is absolutely understandable. Teams that like got dragged through that mud, or work for a company that has an executive that says, I want it this way, and the executive has just checked out and moved on. They're not going to risk it to try to push back. And because also we often can't prove otherwise. Right? Teams that aren't really resourced or enabled or trained to how to measure the impact of the choices the teams are making in the built environment that exists right now. They're on to, like, I got to build a new project. So maybe I study, my architect and I, like, we do a workplace study for that team in Chicago that we're building for right now, but everybody else is just kind of coming in. Maybe we get asked how often are they coming in. We give badge data, but if they go to the engagement survey people and say, may I please ask the employees in the office today what they think about the office that they're in today and how it's working for them, most of them are told no. So maybe some will get, can go to a Leaseman or similar and run workplace effectiveness surveys. But you'd probably agree, right, that the number of companies that can do that, or like get the authority to do rolling regular Leaseman surveys or similar, is low. And if HR thinks they own kind of employee listening, and real estate comes along and goes, I want to start pulse surveying people to find out what they think about this place where they spend a lot of time, the answer is usually no. We don't want you sending another survey. Our employees are like survey fatigued. Leaders don't want them getting this stuff, right? Because you don't really own the product. WeWork, again, one of many, just where I happened to work, we do random sampling all the time for members. He's like, you're paying to be here. So we're going to ask you questions. Not all of you and not all of the time, but some percentage of you are getting small little surveys all the time so that we know if why you might leave. We can correlate, right? Like you're paying. So we don't treat the corporate office that way.
Let me go back to the genesis of a work environment. And, all of these sort of issues that we're talking about, for an organization that's starting to think about their next work environment, where do they begin? What's the process look like to navigate through all of these different issues? Because it's like we're already jumping over multiple silos. There's leadership, there's human aspect of it, the staff attraction, the physical environment. We haven't even talked about sustainability or well-being yet, but all of those issues need to be considered in the way that we think about these work environments.
Right. So you're like using a simple example. We got 100 people in New York or something on our lease is expiring, right? That's the trigger. We're like, what do
Right.
we do now? I get the initial fork in the road is step one, like do to the extent that it is an in-person culture, mostly in person, right? Not fully remote. Like our people get together, we work together, we have leadership who believes that point. Great. Question one is about purpose for me. Why do we have a physical place that we own, operate, control, design, that we do all that? Why? And if the answer is to get together, that's not good enough. You have to probe deeper. Like what is the value stream that the physical environment here is meant to influence? Is it sales, engineering, like hiring? Could just be culture, connection. Great. Connection. That's actually a very common word that comes up. I've written recently about sort of management of social capital, which is a more official way of thinking about connection. Like, okay, today in this office, do we measure connection? Answer is usually no, but like, do you want to? Great. If you do, and then you have a baseline, you want to decide, is this space designed to increase people's social capital? More people that they know around here, more people they can call on for help, more people that they trust. Then when you begin designing, you're not starting the process with bums on seats, designing with how do I build a place that is designed to force multiply people's connections across the organization on the basis that you're coming when that activity matters to you. And if you're in spreadsheet mode today, you don't have to come here. You're welcome to if you want. We will support you being here if you want, but we are not prioritizing your spreadsheet time in this new place. And it just puts you down, like it's the same workplace strategy, the same human-centered research. But I'd say instead of I'm a bank, I'm building a new space for a bank, and then I ask my architect to do benchmarking for other bank spaces on square foot per seat, right? And like utilization, all the not useless, but not business valuable metrics. And say, you're building a connection hub? Great. Your sort of around town safari with your architects should be looking at lots of things that are not offices. How do like business centers do it? How do cultural centers do it? How do schools do it? I don't know. Like that, then you're designing for a reason instead of just designing the next box to hold the people. So I think the companies that are most interesting and most future forward in their model are the ones who are virtual first, meaning in parallel with the what should our new space look like question comes the how are we constantly iterating and learning about the way we choose to work with each other. How is that getting better all the time? So that we don't have to be together because, again, in practice, any company of any size is not all in one place at one time. It's really, power is at the team. It's not about the whole. With that happening, then you can say we're building to do very specific things, which is not the same as like holding everyone, holding pen.
You talk about the purpose, and this goes right back to where we started this conversation and the silos, and each department is going to have a different purpose that they exist to perform within that organization. So, and this is what probably led to this podcast was my experience as an architect. It was rare that I had HR, IT, finance, CEO, all of those positions in the same room at the same time having the conversation.
Right. And yeah, if there's still economy of scale, right? If you say the company is a kit of parts in and of itself, and the company serves to do a number of things, and the groups therefore have varying patterns and objectives, but a lot of them are more similar than they are different, right? We know. Generalized knowledge work. Oh, good. You also have meetings? Yes, I have meetings too. Right. the core differentiation is rarely, especially in like support functions. A lot of the work patterns are very similar. So in theory, the spaces are very similar or could be very similar. And you either get dragged down a path of individual entitlement and like, oh, you need how many offices and you need this. And oh, you don't like workstations. You want more privacy. Oh, you're worried about, and it just causes endless pain and time and resources again to build something that the employees will then almost immediately start complaining about for some reason. Instead of the conviction, again, back to I sort of only half finished my thought. The companies that are virtual first, like the default is not that we don't want to be together, but that we don't have to be together. When they then go and build something, it's usually highly purpose oriented and specific. Like, a lot of those companies, because they're not together on a regular basis, they focus on gathering, like once a month, once a quarter, that kind of thing. So they'll build an office, say, well, it's sure as heck cheaper and better for us to basically run our own meeting center than to constantly send you all to the Marriott across the street, right? So we're building an on-site center. That's what it is. Lots of rooms and spaces and amenities and equipment to facilitate teams descending on this place for 2 or 3 days at a time for, strategy sessions and hackathons and brainstorming. Be like, that's why we built this, so that you come here for that. And you don't have to go down the path of like, I'm trying to solve for every individual person, half of whom will not be here when it opens. It's just it's a fool's errand. And I know it's hard, like easier to say that than to do this in practice. But I'm describing, remember the game Plinko from The Price is Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Boop, 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 that. I think of like companies, if you have a CEO that believes like we need an office to have everyone and everyone should have their own seat and it should be kind of like the old way, it sort of clips all the interesting future forward approaches to workplace off, right? The Plinko chip starts going one way and it can't come back the other way. If you have someone who at least on the surface believes we don't have to be together always at the same time in the same place in our own seat, I'm willing to explore and be curious about that, then other options open up. And I would say to this group, great, if there's not thousands of us, why don't we just start experimenting either in our current space or shift into more service-oriented, transactional, flexible, co-working, whatever you want to call it, like move into that model so that we can learn faster instead of trying to solve perfectly for the next 20 years.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're describing to me. Pre-pandemic, the office was the entire pie. Pretty much everybody existed. The pandemic kind of blew that out of the water and gave us so many choices and options. But when we came back to the office, it was like, well, the default was to come back to the office. And I feel like what you just described is something that a lot of organizations completely overlooked. And now I'm wondering, you talk about the virtual world and the physical world as almost two completely independent things. I mean, can they coexist? Is there a way that the physical world can host and support the virtual world, that we have today, or do they remain separate?
I mean, it's an and, it's not an or. Right? We have both. I wrote an article. One of my earliest articles for the Work Line was called "All CEOs Agree That Where Work Happens Matters," but the where was a play on words to be digital, and that is the baseline, right? All of our work on the knowledge worker side is digital. And we have to be much better and clear about where exactly that happens so that we don't have to deal with the abusive cognitive load of looking for stuff everywhere. And again, as I said, the companies, I studied this at McKinsey using a 25-year instrument called the Organizational Health Index that has been around this whole time, applied to organizations around the world and provably predictive of future sustainable performance, and put some fully remote companies, born remote, always remote, not just remote because of COVID, through that instrument, which didn't even at the time have a question about workplace. Like, do you go into an office or not? It wasn't even in the survey. Again, back to the no one thought it mattered. But when you work at a remote company, everyone's workplace answer is the same. You work in your house. I work in my house. We're all in our house. So you don't even have to ask. And those companies were off the charts performers on this traditional, like industry-wide McKinsey instrument. And in large part, that was because of and this is published, we can put the link in the podcast, their kind of process-based rigor and documentation and knowledge sharing. Because when you're all in your house by yourself, the whole house of cards will come falling down if you don't have very clear ways of working that are asynchronous, like biased for action, allowing people to like move and know how to get things done when there's no one looking over their shoulder. It's incredibly powerful. The rest of the normal companies will benefit from it. But because it's easier to just tell people to come back in the office and pretend that the pandemic didn't happen, they are delaying that work. And the real risk of delaying that work about the work is that the same process-based knowledge is what helps AI be more helpful. It has to know where to look for things, right? So companies that are remote first or remote friendly often, I think, are benefiting more from AI being able to layer on top of that predictability and rigor, where AI can't just like be in the room with everybody in the same way for cultures that rely on in-person connectivity for decisions and action.
Would that also apply to what you talked about earlier, the fail fast, iterate, test new ideas?
Yes. A lot, or some of them by definition in like handbooks and playbooks that you can read on the internet will have written cultures of, to keep things moving quickly, we try to think of decisions in small components such that you can keep going. And if someone else figures out that maybe you took the wrong path or that there's a reason you should have done it, it's like no harm, no foul. And there's a visible evidence of that being like, no, it's okay. Like we doubled back. We did something. It's not a one-way door, right, as Amazon would call it. Like it's okay. And again, because more of the work is written by default, happening asynchronously by default, you sort of see that, right? You could see the corrections and the decisions and the actions instead of it happening ethereally, like in the office.
Well, Phil, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you,
And
Bob.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I would like for you to tell us a little bit about the work line and what you're trying to accomplish with that.
Thank you. So I started a newsletter just over a year ago. That's what is different this time around for me, being an independent advisor, which I did between WeWork and McKinsey the first time. It's called The Work Line because I believe that the problems that exist on experience and outcomes are on the lines and between the lines of our silos. So my tagline for the newsletter is to help people lead across the lines of modern work. I try as much as I can to share stories that are relevant to HR, IT, real estate operations, and to point out things that these different groups don't know about each other or what I'm observing by looking across them. I try not to chase headlines. This is not just another newsletter for this is who said to come back to the office or what is going on. It's from profiles of people that I meet, events that I'm at, observations that I'm making, and try to address a lot of the topics we've talked about here: the conference problem, social capital, the future for chief of work, who's managing frontline experience in kind of recent weeks. But yeah, across the lines, and the misfits in the organizations that feel like they're separated from others who feel the way that they do and don't have a real home, like workplace strategy or employee listening. I hope they find a home on the Work Line. Please subscribe.
Well, I've enjoyed reading it. I think that it brings a very unique perspective and unique ideas. So, keep up the great work.
I'm trying. Walktheworkline.com.
Anything that we left out of this that you think is important to include?
Hopefully a healthy dose of optimism. I love the real estate industry. I point out things that I think we could do better to try to help us do better, not to just be an outsider and provoke. I openly questioned the value of a CoreNet membership, like for me personally, recently on LinkedIn, and then last week ran an AI training program for the NYC CoreNet community. So like I'm trying to hold both things at the same time, like to be critical but constructive. And I genuinely think we are so much opportunity. And I'm looking forward, I like working with clients that see that and want to push on their own leadership to think differently about place. I'm happy to help do that.
No, well, I really appreciate your provocative thinking. So I think it's important.
Productively provocative, I hope.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank
you
you so much, Bob.
time and sharing your thoughts with us.